Welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast. We're back with another SEC team preview here. We've got the Mississippi State Bulldogs up next. Before we do dive in, if you have been enjoying our off-season content, please go ahead and like and subscribe. We do appreciate everyone's support. But taking a look here first at the offensive side of the ball, what strengths do you see in Chris Jan's offensive unit?
Yeah, I mean, Chris Jans has tried to go a little more offense heavy the last couple of years, or I mean, at least last year and this year. It didn't really end up working out. He had to sacrifice some defense, and it just got a little bit ugly towards the end of the season. They ultimately made the tournament, but they never felt like a team that could make any noise. But I mean, this year, they look like they're trying to add some more offensive punch, and I think they have some guys that can alleviate pressure off of Josh Hubbard, who tried to do a lot on the offensive end last season. They actually have a couple other creators of offense for him this year. And, it starts with probably his backcourt mate in Jaden Epps, who's coming over from Georgetown. I think he'll be a nice piece for Hubbard to have another handler by his side. And, Hubbard's not going to feel like he has to do everything. He might still try to do everything. Or he might bomb away from three. How many threes did you say he took? Like 305?
Something like 313.
Okay, it was even more. But I think you could potentially see that rate go down when you have a guy like Hubbard, have a guy like Epps by his side to kind of help him out in the creation aspect. Like Harris and Kugel were solid pieces on this team last year, but they were more secondary playmakers, and they like their catch and shoot actions. And I think this aspect's going to help Hubbard even playing some more secondary actions, like playing more off screens, maybe a little bit in spot up to like really open up his shooting ability. He took a lot of guarded threes last year, and maybe his game will get opened up and there might be some more efficiency there for him, which is nice. And like another piece that can help out is UAB transfer Jabari McGee. He's going to be a guy that can get downhill and score it, play make a little bit, I think. And he might be a guy that has to play some more minutes because the Epps Hubbard backcourt duo might not be the best on the defensive end. And I do think McGee is a guy that can help out there. Then one final guy that I think can help out in this aspect is Achor, who we didn't really see much last year. Saw a lot of him at Samford, had some success there. But I think he's going to be a skill-based four-man who's going to be valuable in dribble handoffs with Epps and Hubbard. Like he's sort of like Cam Matthews, like he was last season. Obviously, a little bit less defense. Achor is a little bit less athletic, but he's got more of a perimeter game. He can be an option in like pick and pop and like pick and short roll, and he can do some nice things there. Like because as good as Cam Matthews was, like floor spacing wasn't one of those things that he was very good at, and I think Achor can kind of help out in that area. And one final thing is I think the ball security is going to be pretty solid. It was good last year, but adding an extra handler with Hubbard and in Jaden Epps is really going to help there. And so ultimately, it's just taking the pressure off of Hubbard that I think might be able to open up a few more things here.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely added some offense to relieve some pressure there. I think that'll be a huge help, right? You mentioned like Jabari McGee. He can shoot it. He's pretty efficient last year at a 56% effective field goal percentage. Achor, I think, is an intriguing piece. We didn't really see him last year, but before that, he's impactful. So we'll see what we have with him. For me, in terms of weaknesses, one of the main things that I had noted, while I do think like ball security, you had mentioned should be good. I think like one of the main issues with all of these guards is that they're kind of like hunting their own shot most of the time. I don't know how much like creation for others they're really going to do. You look at like Josh Hubbard last year, 18% assist rate. He took care of the ball well. Obviously he's going to be taking he took a lot of shots last year, so that number is a little bit skewed. I think he may be in store for a little bit higher assist rate this year with more around him. But then you look at like Jaden Epps, 14% assist rate last year. Jabari McGee, 18% assist rate. So I don't know like how fantastic this group will be, in creating shots for others. And I think it's just naturally just by like where they've been, where they've played, and what their role has been as kind of like primary creators on the perimeter, getting their own shot. You know, so that's one thing. I think another thing would be just like some shot selection stuff. I think like Josh Hubbard, for as good as he is, he takes some pretty poor shots sometimes, some really deep ones, and obviously he's shown the ability to make them. But I think that's like just I think an area of concern, even though this year they've got more around him, so maybe he won't take as many of those. And then the final thing, and probably the main concern for me, is the overall front court depth and front court scoring on this team, right? You brought in like Quincy Ballard from Wichita State, right? He's primarily just an offensive rebounder, like lob threat kind of guy. He's not a guy you're really going to play through at all. He's really athletic, but he's a career 2% assist rate guy. You're not going to play through him in the post at all. You're not going to post him up really at all. Maybe they use a guy we haven't talked about yet. Maybe they use a guy like Brandon Walker, coming in from, where was he before? Montana State, right? Kind of a bigger body, 6'8", 255. Maybe they use him in some way, averaged almost 2 assists a game last year. So maybe they can play through him a little bit as kind of an interior presence. But I just don't really love the interior scoring or creation on this team.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Walker could play, but if you could sub him out every possession and he didn't have to play any defense, I think that would be the way he plays. But like,
right,
he had a 36% usage rate last year at Montana State. Like he was really the engine of that offense, and like he would be kind of useful for this team because I mean, yeah, rim efficiency or like rim scoring volume is a real issue for me. In losing Keyshawn Murphy is like very significant. And you mentioned Quincy Ballard. He's not a guy that you're going to play through. He just has a much different offensive skill set. Like you could use Murphy in short roll. Like he can make decisions out of that. He had a nice little intermediate game as well. And you're not getting any of that with Ballard. You're getting a guy and like you have to throw the ball at the rim for him to go get it. Or, I mean, maybe he can do a little bit with the ball in his hands. Like, but ultimately, like he's getting the ball and getting it out quick. And he's going to be, either trying to dunk it or drawing a foul. And there's just really no creation with his game. And I think Murphy's a big loss because of that. And the rest of this group is pretty perimeter reliant. I think like Hubbard and Epps, like they don't get to the rim. And I do think like off ball shooting is actually kind of a weakness outside of those two guys. Like you have some options and like Sean Jones is going to play a lot this season and he is not a shooter. He's basically strictly out there for wing defense. And you have like Amir Ali coming off the bench. I think he's a better shooting talent than the number that he displayed last year, 32.6. But I definitely think he's better than that. He's not a very good defender, though, so I don't know how much he plays. And the same thing with the 4-star freshman King Grace, who could come in, play a role as a movement shooter, but ultimately the defensive side of the ball is going to hold him back as well. So yeah, I still think floor efficiency is an issue for, a program that, or like a Chris Jan's offense that really hasn't been good here. They've improved every year in all 3 years that he's been at Mississippi State. But last year, like he tried to build this team a little bit more around offense and they finished 116th in effective field goal percentage. So I do think their ceiling is pretty capped when it comes to their floor efficiency, mostly because they don't really have that high volume rim finisher anymore. And your two highest usage guys are guards who really like to spray it from three.
Yeah. And one other thing, you mentioned losing Keyshawn Murphy. We've now seen them in his first 3 years at Mississippi State get worse on the offensive glass with each season. I think the front court depth could create, even more of a drop off this year, especially with the loss of Keyshawn Murphy, who is, fantastic on the offensive glass. Last year, they were 57th in offensive rebound rate. Year before, 21st. Year before, 14th. So I think we could see even potentially more of a drop off in that area this year, just based on like pure personnel wise, going more perimeter oriented with more guards, and no Keyshawn Murphy, who's a beast there. So I think that could be an issue as well. But shifting gears to the defensive side of the ball, what strengths do you see on this side?
This is a group that's going to force a lot of turnovers. I think that's pretty standard with a Chris Jan's defense, especially so far at Mississippi State. And, I think they brought in a couple guys that are going to help out in Jaden Epps and Jabari McGee, who are really just looking to make plays on this end. Like, I think Jabari McGee is especially an underrated defender, and I think he could ultimately carve out some minutes, maybe make this even like a 50-50 split with Epps because of this side of the ball. He was an underrated defender last year who was just playing for a bad defense. He had a 2.3% steal rate last year, which isn't like mind-boggling by any means, but he was playing on a team that was 306 nationally in turnover rate forced, which led the team by a decent margin. Or led the guard group by a decent margin. So I think he's a guy that's going to be able to perform on this end. And then you have Sean Jones, who's obviously a great wing defender for this team and has been for a few years. Like I mentioned, it's just the offensive side that kind of caps his minutes. So he's probably more of a 20-minute guy, just like he was last year. But while he's on the floor, he's going to be a real impact on this side. And then, you have a solid rim protection unit up front with Ballard and Achor, if that turns out to be the starting lineup. I don't know if Achor is a 7.7% block rate guy by any means. I don't think he's that athletic. Like, he could do that in the SoCon, and it was a Samford defense that was really just hunting blocks at the rim. It's a rim swarming kind of defense, and I think that kind of was the main driver in his block rate. But I think he'll be fine. I think he can still be like a 4.5 to potentially 5% block rate guy, which is good for a guy that's going to play the 4. And Ballard's obviously great. He was 7.3 last year. He's been, this is 6th year playing college basketball. We've seen it for a long time now. He's going to be just fine there. And then one other guy to monitor is 4-star freshman Jamarian Davis Fleming. I think he's a perfect fit for this defensive scheme. If he's going to play the 4, the offensive side would limit him a little bit as well. Like, he's more of a play finisher, like lob threat in transition, but he's a really high flyer that can protect the rim at a high level, especially in this scheme that you're going to be rotating a lot. You're going to be forced into rotation, and he's a guy that can kind of just fly out of nowhere and make a great play. So I think Jamarian Davis Fleming is a guy that can play a decent role. Like, if Achor isn't able to translate as well as we think he's going to on the offensive end.
Yeah, no, I had kind of noted his name just because, like, on the surface, like, the front court depth in terms of like rim protection doesn't look fantastic. Like, you have Quincy Ballard, who's obviously done it at a high level. You've got Achor who, we don't really know what we're gonna get from him, right? He didn't really play last year, as we've said. He played seven games. But then, like, it's kind of up to behind that. It's up to freshmen like, Jamarian Davis Fleming, T. Bartlett, another guy that's 4-star. I don't really think he's much of a rim protector, but he's a big body to kind of put out there. He's 6'11", 290, 89th overall recruit. So, he could probably help in the defensive rebounding department, which, like, for me is kind of an area of weakness overall, because I don't really see much defensive rebounding out of the guard group or the wings. I don't really love like, Ballard's a good defensive rebounder, but overall in the front court, like, with potentially a couple freshmen being the front court off the bench, the overall depth in general to provide defensive rebounding is a bit concerning to me. Last year, 187th in defensive rebound rate. I could see them being potentially even a little bit worse than that this year. Another area of concern for me on this side of the floor is just their guard positional size. Like, they're gonna force turnovers, but you're looking at your 3 guards there in Jabari McGee, Josh Hubbard, and Jaden Epps, all at 5'11", 6'2", and 6 feet. and then the depth behind them. Chris Jans has gone more offensive minded, right? And now the depth behind them. You mentioned a guy like King Grace, who's like not really ready, probably on the defensive end of the floor. Like Sean Jones will have to be important on this end. So I think it's going to be like it's going to have to be those four guys guarding, a lot of the three perimeter spots. I think you got a guy like Amir Ali who can probably fit in there as well. But overall, like I just think that depth and positional size there in that backcourt could ultimately end up being a problem.
Yeah, that's what I'm pretty worried about too. And like you mentioned Amir Ali there at the end, but he doesn't really move well for being
No.
6'8". Like he doesn't really move well in space. I think he was the worst defender by defensive box plus minus on Arizona State's roster last year, which it's kind of tough to do as like a 6'8" wing. Like it just kind of shows that he's not really the greatest on ball defender. And from the film I've watched, it's not very good and doesn't really fit here all that well. But yeah, that's the main theme for me is like it's just lack of guys that fit the scheme, lack of recovery defenders, and it's particularly in the backcourt. Like I mentioned Jones and McGee as being solid, but I think it's mostly a shot at Hubbard and Epps as a tandem, and I think these two are going to be playing like a bulk of the minutes. So I think it's fair to have a decent amount of concerns. And Mississippi State last year, they really struggled with 3-point defense, and I think you can attribute like some of it to variance or just sort of unlucky, but they had personnel issues in this regard last year, and it doesn't look like they fixed them. They were in the 76th percentile in unguarded catch and shoot frequency allowed last season, 14th percentile in efficiency against that. So I guess you can say it's a tad unlucky, but you're giving up a lot of those. So you're at the mercy of it at that point. And they were also in the 25th percentile against guarded catch and shoot. So it just shows that I just don't really think they have like the first shot defense skills. They didn't really have the length last season or the length compared to past Chris Jan's teams. And I don't really think they addressed that all that well. So I do think it's going to be a similar weakness. And you mentioned the defensive rebounding stuff. They're never really that great in that area. I don't think they're going to be all that good again. I do think this turns out to be a team that is more turnover reliant, and it's a group that doesn't have like as many guys as usual that can really turn you over. And, at the end of the day, Chris Jan's defenses are never bad, but last year's rendition looks too much like this season's. They finished 50th in adjusted defense last year, which was his worst in 3 years at Mississippi State. And I do think they're in like a similar like range as they were last year. So, I mean, and we're not really high on the offense. And if the defense isn't going to be their backbone, like I think it's pretty fair to have definitely some concerns whether this team can make the tournament again or not.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you there. Which I guess now like leads me into like ceiling and floor of this team MVP, team X factor. Where do you see all of those things for Mississippi State?
Yeah, it's pretty clearly Josh Hubbard for MVP for me. I mean, he's been here this is going to be his third year, and he's been productive in his first two. He's going to do it again. He's going to be the engine. So not much more I need to say there, but I think the X factor is Achor. I think it's more of like if an unknown, he's more of like a swing piece. Like there's a lot of things that could happen here. Like didn't really do much at K-State last year in 7 games, and he got dismissed from the program. So it's I think he's going to be an important guy really on both ends of the floor. Like if he can be a good enough recovery defender to fit in this scheme, and if he can be like that dribble handoff hub at times and be an outlet for Josh Hubbard, I think he's going to ultimately be a very important piece.
Yeah. I went with the same two guys. I think like Hubbard's the MVP again for this team, and Achor is kind of like the more unknown, right? I mean, we've seen him be productive, but not at a power conference level. So if he can be productive, it'd be really important to the success of this team. So that's why I think he belongs there. It was a pretty clear choice for me. Now ceiling and floor for this team, I think Torvik projects them at like 13th, I believe, in the SEC. where do you see them falling?
Yeah, which I mean, 13th in the SEC is like really not that bad considering like there's a lot of teams that are very good. Like there's a little bit less depth than there was last year, but ultimately you finish 13th in this league, you could be like a top 45 team in Ken Palm by the end of the year. But I think their ceiling is around that 8 range. I think there's just a lot of teams in that like 8 to 13 or 14 range that are all pretty interchangeable. So I can see them getting there. And if they're eighth in the league, I think they can be a 7 or 8 seed in the tournament. Ultimately, I don't see them reaching their ceiling, and I think they could ultimately fall to like 14th in the league, and they would be out of the tournament in that range for me.
Yeah, for me, I had them between 9 and 14. I just think there's some glaring concerns, as we've touched on, that could get them to fall all the way there. Their ceiling, I guess, like Josh Hubbard can be really good. Maybe a Chor really is a true X factor for this team and gets them to that ceiling. But if I kind of had to make my prediction, I would expect them to be closer to that floor than ceiling. Unfortunately, but before we wrap things up, do you have a bold prediction here?
Yeah, that's kind of the theme for me. My bold prediction is Chris Jans and Mississippi State missed the tournament for the first time in his era. So I just see more paths for failure than I do success. Really on both ends of the floor. I understand what he's trying to do, and I kind of saw that he was trying to go a little more offense heavy last season, but it's been at the expense of the backbone of his rosters, which is his defense, and he just hasn't. They haven't quite figured out the formula on the offensive end, and I don't think this roster is particularly ready to be like a top 15 or 20 offense in the country.
Yeah, that I certainly see it that way. I think I just don't really love this team. For me, I went with an offensive rebounding stat. I mentioned earlier on the loss of Keyshawn Murphy being really important. Since Chris Jans has left Bowling Green in 2015, he's never finished outside 57th in offensive rebound rate. That was last season. I actually said they're going to finish outside the top 80 this year in offensive rebound rate. I just think, with that loss of Murphy, maybe like a guy, like we mentioned, Jamarian Davis Fleming can provide some value on the offensive glass. Maybe a Chor can, but I think like Quincy Ballard is that guy up front. And aside from that, I just don't really see as much upside on the offensive glass as they've had in years past.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, they went a little more skill based at the 4 with the Chor, and Cam Matthews was obviously a really good offensive rebounder. So they kind of lost that element. I just didn't realize how good his New Mexico State teams were on the glass and how good they were really across the board. I mean, they were awesome in that league and ultimately got him this job. So it brought a lot of the same like qualities from those teams, but I think he's just trying to shift the narrative a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. But anyway, we'll wrap things up here with Mississippi State. Thank you for listening to the Mainly Hoops podcast.